Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
The car was silent except for the hum of the engine and the faint patter of rain on the windshield. We were halfway to her parents' house, a 45-minute drive through winding country roads lined with skeletal trees, when she said it. "Careful, Noah. You're breathing too loud." Her voice was soft, almost playful, but it landed like a shard of glass slicing through the quiet. Not a greeting, not a glance my way, just that a quiet command to shrink myself smaller, to make less noise in the space we shared. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, my knuckles whitening against the worn leather, my eyes fixed on the blurring taillights ahead, while she tapped away on her phone, texting someone whose name wasn't saved in her contacts, the screen's glow casting eerie shadows on her face. She thought I didn't notice. She always thought I didn't notice the late-night notifications shed silence too quickly, the way her laughter would bubble up at messages that weren't mine. Her name was Lila, my wife of 7 years, though lately it felt like we were strangers sharing a lease, orbiting each other in a home that once pulsed with shared dreams. Dinner at her parents' was already a tightrope walk over a chasm of unspoken tensions, her dad's half-hearted handshake that lingered just a beat too short, her sister's over-attentive hovering. She refilled glasses and asked if anyone needed anything. Her mom's polite smile that never reached her eyes, tight as a drawn curtain. They seated me in the wobbly chair at the end of the table, the one that creaked with every shift of weight, its legs splintered from years of neglect. It felt intentional, like a subtle reminder that I didn't quite belong in this family portrait, outsider painted in faded colors. The turkey was dry as old leather, the wine was cheap and tart on the tongue, and the conversation was a minefield of small talk laced with barbs. Then came the question, innocent enough on the surface, from her cousin across the table. "So, how's married life treating you to these days? Still all fireworks and fairy tales?" Lila leaned back in her chair, her glass of Merlot catching the warm glow of the chandelier overhead, turning the deep red liquid into a swirling vortex. She smiled, sharp and practiced, like she'd been waiting for the spotlight to swing her way, rehearsing this line in the mirror of her mind. "Oh, you know," she said, twirling the stem of her glass with deliberate slowness, her nails painted a defiant crimson glinting like warning signs. "If I ever got bored, I could walk away. No fuss, no strings, no looking back." She took a sip, her eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second, a challenge hidden in the depths of her gaze, daring me to react, to shatter the fragile peace. The table went still as I held breath. Her mom coughed into her napkin, a muffled sound of discomfort. Her dad stared at his plate, fork hovering mid-air over a mound of mashed potatoes. I felt my pulse thunder in my throat, hot and insistent, but I didn't flinch. I didn't explode. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, stood up with the scrape of chair legs on hardwood echoing like a verdict, and walked out. No words, no scene, just the cool rush of autumn air hitting my face as the screen door slammed softly behind me. I drove home alone, the radio off to spare myself the mockery of love songs, the rain heavier now, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. By the time I pulled into our driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, I wasn't angry, not the red-hot fury I'd felt in past arguments. I was empty, hollowed out like a gourd left too long in the frost. I walked straight to the closet in our bedroom, the one stuffed with memories folded away like forgotten letters, and started packing her things, her silk dresses that whispered against my skin in better days, her high-heeled boots scuffed from nights out I wasn't invited to, the delicate jewelry she wore anymore, tangled in a velvet pouch, discarded promises. I folded each item with care, not out of lingering love, but because I wanted it to be deliberate, methodical. I wanted her to know I wasn't unraveling into chaos, I was letting go, thread by careful thread. By midnight, 4 bags sat neatly by the door like silent sentinels, zipped shut and labeled in my neat script: clothes, books, misc, and on the kitchen counter, where her favorite mug, a kitschy thing with Queen of Everything printed in peeling glitter, usually rested like a throne, I left a note. Just one sentence, inked in black ballpoint: "You said you could leave any time." Here is your chance. Take it." When Lila walked in hours later, her cheeks flushed from the biting cold, her wool coat still buttoned to the chin, if it could shield her from the chill inside. She froze in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights. The bags were impossible to miss, lined up like soldiers waiting for orders, their leather handles gleaming faintly under the hallway light. She didn't touch them. She didn't cry or scream or hurl accusations. She just stepped over them with a casual grace, her heels clicking with that familiar rhythm that used to make my heart skip a stone on water tap. Tap, tap. Now it sounded like a countdown to oblivion, each step echoing the distance growing between us. "Really, Noah?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief, laced with that patronizing tone she reserved for moments she deemed beneath her. All this over a comment at dinner. It was a joke, for God's sake. Lighten up. I didn't respond. I'd spent years responding, explaining myself raw, apologizing for shadows I didn't cast, and it never changed a thing. Her jokes were never just jokes, they were tests, probes into my breaking point, and I was tired of failing them, tired of the role she'd scripted for me, the reliable fool who always came back. She laughed then, a sharp, theatrical sound that bounced off the walls like shattered glass, hands planted on her hips, like she was scolding a child for spilling milk. "You're this fragile." Seriously, I was just shutting them up, deflecting the interrogation. "You know how my family is." But her eyes betrayed her a flicker of something cold and calculating, a glint that said she wasn't surprised it'd finally noticed the cracks, only that it acted on them, refusing to patch them over with another layer of denial. She didn't apologize, didn't bridge the gulf with even a faint olive branch. Instead, she walked to the bedroom, the sway of her hips a habit unbroken, tossed her coat over the armchair like she owned the space still, and opened her knit-stand drawer, not the one cluttered with her lip balm and dog-eared paperbacks, but the one she kept locked with a small brass key on a chain around her neck. The key was already in her hand, twisted free with a soft click, like she'd been waiting for this exact unraveling. I don't know what I expected in that moment. Love letters from an old flame, perhaps, or keepsakes from her wild college days, tucked away like guilty secrets. Instead, she pulled out a phone, a cheap, scuffed burner model, the kind you pick up at a gas station for cash and secrets. Its case cracked along one edge like a fault line. She didn't hide it, didn't shove it back in shame. She tossed it onto the bed between us, her expression a mask of defiant boredom, daring me to pick it up and peer into the abyss. "Go on," she said, her voice flat as the winter sky outside. "You want the truth. It's all there, every dirty little detail." I hesitated, my stomach twisting into knots of dread and disbelief, but curiosity or maybe masochism won out. I unlocked it with trembling fingers. No password. She didn't even bother with that basic courtesy, as if the humiliation was the point. The messages started 9 months ago, a timeline that seared into my brain like a brand. The contact was saved as L, innocuous enough to fool a glance, but the photos told the real, gut-wrenching story. A man, early 30s, all sharp jawlines and gym mirrors reflecting endless rows of weights, his smile cocky in shots from dimly lit bars, sun-drenched beaches, anonymous hotel rooms with rumpled sheets, and her Lila, smiling in ways I hadn't seen in years, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes alight with a fire that had long since dimmed in our shared spaces. Not the tight, performative smile she gave me lately over hurried breakfasts, but something alive, reckless, untamed. The texts were worse, a digital trail of betrayal that read like a novel I never wanted to open. Entire threads mocking me, dissecting our life like a cadaver on a slab. Hey, so predictable. Always home by 6 with dinner warming. I could vanish for a week, and he'd just mow the lawn like clockwork. Poor Noah. Still thinks him his dream girl adorable. Really. She sat on the edge of the bed, legs crossed, watching me scroll through the wreckage with a quiet curiosity. Her face unreadable, no guilt etching lines around her mouth, no panic widening her eyes, just a detached interest, like she was waiting to see how much weight the evidence could bear before I buckled. I don't remember letting go of the phone, but it hit the floor with a sharp crack the screen splintering into a web of fractures that mirrored the one in my chest. She flinched not at my pain, raw and exposed, but at the broken device, her precious portal to escape. "Careful," she said, almost reflexively, the words slipping out like a habit from better days. I looked at her, really looked, peeling back the layers of familiarity to see someone I didn't know at all. Not my wife. The woman who used to leave me voicemails, just to ramble about the absurdity of her day, of the way the sunset painted the office windows gold. A stranger wearing her skin, her laugh, her scent like a wolf in borrowed sheep's clothing. "I was going to tell you," she said, her tone as casual as if she were discussing a missed hair appointment or a faulty dishwasher. "It wasn't supposed to be serious, just something else. A spark. You wouldn't understand, you've always been so steady." That was the knife twisting deeper, not the affair itself, a blunt instrument of hurt, not the lies that had woven through our days like invisible threads, but the way she framed my loyalty as a flaw, my devotion as a cage. I'd spent years being her anchor in stormy seas, cooking dinner after long shifts, fixing the leaky faucet in the dead of night with YouTube tutorials and calloused hands, planning vacations she'd cancel last minute for work emergencies that smelled suspiciously of perfume. I thought that's what love was, showing up every single day, no matter how heavy the load grew, no matter how the ropes chafed. But to her, I was just the backdrop to her restlessness, a reliable set piece in a play she'd outgrown. "Is he here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, scraped raw from the silence. "In town, I mean." She hesitated, her fingers drumming a nervous tattoo on her knee, then nodded, the motion small but seismic. "He moved closer a while back. For work, mostly." The timeline hit me like a freight train barreling through the fragile station of my memories. She'd been seeing him while we were repainting the living room walls in that god-awful eggshell white she insisted on. Me on a ladder with paint-splattered jeans, her handing up brushes with distracted smiles. While I was working overtime at the warehouse, double shifts to scrape together a down payment on a house we'd tour on weekends, dreaming of a yard for kids that now felt like a cruel joke. While I was patiently teaching her mom how to navigate her new tablet over video calls, enduring endless ups, I pressed the wrong button with saintly patience. It was all a performance, a meticulously staged farce, and I was the unwitting audience, applauding from the shadows she cast. She stood then, smoothing her skirt with hands that didn't tremble, picking up the smallest bag, the one with her makeup palettes and tangled earrings, and slung it over her shoulder, like it was just another Tuesday. "He'll crash at Tara's for a bit," she said, her voice light, as if discussing a girl's night out rather than the dissolution of a decade. Tara, her friend from yoga class who always looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, her eyes lingering with unspoken pity. Lila paused at the door, her hand resting on the cool brass knob, and turned back with what passed for concern, mechanical, scripted. "You'll be okay, right? I mean, really?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for cracks she could exploit or ignore. I didn't answer. I wanted to scream until my throat bled, to beg her to explain when I became so invisible that she could build a parallel life right under our roof, to demand the when and why and how of it all. But I just stood there, rooted to the spot like an oak in a gale, branches snapping but trunk unyielding. She didn't wait for a response, didn't linger in the doorway like a scene from a melodrama. She didn't slam the door in a blaze of fury. She left as if she was stepping out for coffee and a croissant, not stepping out of a marriage, the latch clicking shut with a finality softer than a sigh. I stood in the hallway, the bag still untouched like abandoned luggage at an airport, the note still unread on the counter. The silence was deafening, not the peaceful hush of solitude, but a suffocating void. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the echo of her heels to fade into nothing. The next hours blurred into a haze of mechanical motion and muted shock. I didn't cry, not the heaving sobs I'd imagined in darker fantasies of betrayal. I walked through the apartment like a ghost haunting its own life, seeing it for the first time in years through eyes stripped of illusion. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom, a cloying jasmine that now twisted my stomach, sharp and unfamiliar, like the scent of someone else's skin pressed her close. Her favorite mug sat abandoned in the sink, lipstick smudged on the rim, a faded rose shade, a mocking remnant of mornings that used to start with shared coffee and sleepy kisses. A single silver earring lay on the vanity counter, glinting under the fluorescent light like a taunt, a solitary survivor of the storm. I opened the hall closet then, the one she always kept locked with that small brass key dangling from her necklace like a talisman, claiming it held private stuff, old journals, childhood trinkets, things to tender for shared light. I'd never questioned it, never pushed the door ajar, because trust, I thought, was respecting those invisible boundaries, honoring the sacred spaces she carved out. Now, in the raw aftermath, I didn't care about boundaries or trust or the fragile etiquette of our unraveling. The lock was unlatched, hanging loose as if she'd stopped bothering to hide once the charade cracked open. Inside were two boxes, not flimsy shoe boxes, but sturdy wooden ones, the kind you inherit from a grandparent's attic, scarred with age and stories. Beneath them, tucked into the shadows, an envelope with my name scrawled across the front. Noah. Not the cutesy end she'd used in our early days, when notes left on pillows were love letters in disguise. My hands shook as I tore it open, the paper rasping like a confession in the quiet. No letter flowed with apologies or explanations, no heartfelt plea for forgiveness, just a list, handwritten in her looping script, numbered and bulleted with clinical precision, as if she'd been preparing a boardroom presentation on the deficiencies of our union, things she felt our marriage lacked, deficits tallied like items on a grocery receipt, spontaneity in the everyday grind, passion that doesn't flicker out like a cheap candle, edge, that thrill of the unknown. One line gutted me deeper than any text message could. Haze reliable, a steady harbor, but I crave the chaos of open seas. I sank to the floor amid the dust motes dancing in the slanted light, the paper crumpling in my fist like a defeated flag. It spent years being her safe harbor, weathering her storms with quiet endurance, and she'd resented me for the very shelter I provided, mistaking calm for complacency. The next morning dawned grey and unrelenting, waking up on the couch, still in my rumpled clothes from dinner, the fabric stiff with dried rain. The apartment was too quiet, no hum of her hairdryer through the cracked bathroom door, no clink of her spoon against a coffee cup, she stirred in too much sugar, no murmur of morning news from her phone. I thought about calling her, not to beg for reconciliation, but to ask when did I stop being enough to fill the spaces in her heart? When did she start rewriting me as the problem, the boring anchor dragging her under? But I didn't dial. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a lifeline to pain I wasn't ready to tug. Instead, I cleaned, channeling the turmoil into motion. I started with the kitchen, scrubbing counters until my knuckles ached red and raw, the lemon scent of cleaner burning my nostrils. Then the living room, tossing her glossy magazines into the recycling with mechanical flips, her half-burned scented candles into the trash, vanilla and sandalwood, scents that once evoked lazy Sundays, now soured like regret. The framed photo of us at the pier, wine-tousled and laughing, her head on my shoulder. I pried it from the wall, the nails scraping plaster, and shredded it before I could second-guess. Confetti of a happier fiction scattering across the floor. My phone buzzed at noon, a vibration that jolted me from the trance. A text from her, to stark words, "Haze here." No explanation, no emoji to soften the blow, no context to frame the declaration, just a statement, cold and declarative as a verdict. I stared at it, my pulse racing erratic, a wild drum in my ears. Was she taunting me, rubbing salt in the wound with deliberate cruelty, warning me off some imagined territory? I didn't respond. I couldn't from the words, my thumbs hovering uselessly over the keyboard. My hands were shaking, not from fear of confrontation, but from the overwhelming realization that this wasn't over, that the knife she'd plunged wasn't twisted yet. She wasn't fading quietly into the night like a bad dream. She was doubling down, making sure I knew her secret was no longer a secret, but a banner waved in my face. I don't know why I did it, some masochistic pull, perhaps, or a desperate need for closure, but I grabbed my keys and drove to Tara's, the wipers slashing rhythmically against the relentless drizzle. I hadn't been there since a backyard barbecue 2 summers ago, when Lila still held my hand under the picnic table and called me her better half with a wink that lit up the twilight. Now, pulling into the cracked driveway lined with overgrown hostas, I felt like a ghost revisiting a life that had evicted me. I sat in the car for long minutes, engine idling, watching the windows for any sign of movement, expecting what? A silhouette of entwined shadows. A confrontation scripted like a soap opera. Nothing stirred. The house loomed blank and unyielding. Finally, steeling myself, I rang the bell, the chime echoing hollowly. Tara answered, her face a mosaic of pity and discomfort, eyes darting as if seeking an escape route. "She's not here," she said quickly, too quickly, blocking the threshold with her body. "She left an hour ago. Took her bag and yeah." I nodded, my throat tight as a noose, the rain dripping from my hair onto the welcome mat. "She said Hayes here," I said, the words tasting like ash. Tara sighed, a long exhale of resignation, and stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft click. "Noah, let it go. Just let it go. You're not the villain in this story. You just weren't what she wanted in the end. Not anymore. Not what she wanted." The words echoed in my skull. I drove home, the rain heavier now, sheeting down in silver curtains that blurred the world into watercolor smears. I kept searching for the moment it all broke, replaying our history like a faulty film reel. But maybe it wasn't a single moment, a dramatic snap. Maybe it was a slow unraveling, 1,000 tiny erosions, the eye rolls at my safe jokes, the cancelled date nights blamed on headaches, the dozen missed good nights where she turned her back like a wall. When I got home, the front door stood ajar, unlocked a careless oversight, or an invitation. My heart stopped, a stutter in my chest, and I stepped inside cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight like warnings. And there he was, lounging on my couch, if it were his throne, clad in my faded flannel shirt that hung loose on his lean frame, sipping from my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle from our first camping trip. Lila stood behind him, arms crossed over her chest like a sentinel, her expression calm, almost serene, like she was showing off a new piece of furniture to an old acquaintance. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't offer a hand or an apology. He just nodded, casual and appraising, like we were acquaintances bumping into each other at a crowded bar. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, confident in a way that grated against my frayed nerves. He was younger than he'd imagined from the photos, early 30s with a sharpness to his features, high cheekbones, stubble shadowing a jaw that spoke of late nights and fewer regrets. Lila spoke first, her tone measured, as if narrating a documentary. "Noah, we just wanted to talk, clear the air, we." The word was a blade slipping between ribs, implying partnership, alliance in my exclusion. "You brought him here," I said, my voice low and hollow, echoing in the space between us. "Into our home, without a word." She shrugged, unfazed, her shoulders rising and falling like a ripple on still water. "You weren't using it." "Not really." That was the moment something in me shattered, not my heart, already cracked beyond mending, but the last thread of hope that this was a mistake, a fever dream I could wake from. I looked at him, then at her. The pair of them framed against the familiar backdrop of our living room, the bookshelf he'd built from IKEA instructions, one rainy weekend. The throw blanket shed knitted in a burst of domesticity 2 winters ago. "You didn't replace me," I said quietly, stepping forward into the charged air. "You just took the pieces." She didn't want the excitement, the lies, the mess. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation breaking her composure, but she didn't argue, didn't defend. He leaned forward, setting the mug down on the coffee table with a deliberate clink, the ceramic ringing like a bell tolling. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble or start a fight," he said, his tone conciliatory than it edged with condescension. "Lila told me everything about you, about us. I respect what you built here. Truly. Respect." The word was laughable, absurd in its audacity, but I didn't laugh. What came out was a single trembling breath, ragged and revealing. I turned without another word, the room spinning slightly at the edges, and walked to the bedroom, my sanctuary turned battlefield. I grabbed my duffel bag from the closet floor, the canvas worn from years of road trips we'd taken in better times, and packed. Not her things, mine. A few threadbare shirts, my laptop with its sticker-covered lid, my dad's old pocket watch that ticked like a heartbeat against my palm. I didn't look at them as I passed the living room, the pair silhouetted like actors in a play long since exited. She called after me, her voice laced with that familiar disdain. You always run when it gets hard, Noah. When the real stuff comes up. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob cool against my heated skin, and turned just enough to meet her gaze. And you always lie when it gets real, Lila. When the masks slip. Then I was gone, the door clicking shut behind me like the final punctuation on a sentence too long in coming. I didn't go to a friend's house that night, didn't check into a sterile motel with its buzzing neon sign. I drove to the lake where Lila and I used to escape in the early days, back when we thought love was a salve for life's sharper edges. A quiet cove 20 minutes from town where the water lapped at gravel shores under a canopy of whispering pines. I parked haphazardly, the engine ticking as it called, and sat on the hood of the car, the metal still warm beneath me, staring at the water reflecting the moon in fractured silver shards. The night air was crisp, carrying the earthy tang of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. I thought it'd feel destroyed, pulverized into irreparable dust, but I didn't. I felt still, a profound, anchoring quiet that settled over the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation like a bomb. They were real, those wounds gaping and tender. But so was this serenity, this realization that I'd spent years trying to be someone she'd never truly wanted, molding myself into shapes that chafed and confined. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses, and for the first time in months, I let myself remember the man I was before her, the one who hiked trails at dawn, who journaled feverish ideas under lamplight, who laughed loud and unapologetic at his own folly. That man wasn't gone, head just being buried under layers of accommodation, of yes, dear, and whatever you need. As the loons called across the water, mournful and free, I felt the first stirrings of something like hope, not fireworks, but embers glowing steady. I called my sister in Colorado the next day, our conversation halting at first, the distance between us more than miles, since Dad's passing had pulled us into separate orbits. But she didn't hesitate, her voice warm through the static. Come stay with me, Noah. I've got a couch that's comfier than it looks, a fridge full of beer, and a spare room gathering dust. No questions, just family. 2 weeks later, I was unpacking in a new city, huddled against jagged mountains that pierced the sky like ancient sentinels, the air thin and pine-scented, a far cry from the humid lowlands we'd left. I got a job at a small independent bookstore downtown, its shelves groaning under the weight of worlds unbound, shelving novels and chatting with customers who didn't know my scars, who saw only the easy smile I was reeling. I started running again, pounding dirt paths at sunrise, my breath steady and sensing with the rhythm of my feet against earth. I even picked up a guitar from a pawn shop, its strings humming under fingers calloused from warehouse work, something I hadn't touched since college dorm nights filled with bad covers and worse poetry. Lila used to say it was too noisy, a distraction from her need for quiet focus now. The chords felt like freedom, raw and unfiltered. Lila never reached out after that night, and I didn't either. No midnight texts born of regret, no voicemails laced with half apologies. She didn't owe me an apology, a neat bow on the chaos she'd wrought, and I didn't owe her the rest of my life, the years I could spend chasing shadows of what might have been. Some people are lessons etched deep, not forever companions, and I was learning mine, carving it into the marrow. Love isn't about bending yourself until you break to fit another's jagged edges. It's about standing tall in your own skin, even when it's just you and the vast, echoing silence. Epilogue 3 months later, I'm sitting in my sister's backyard as the sun dips low, painting the Rockies in strokes of amber and rose, strumming my guitar while her golden retriever, Max, chases fireflies with puppyish abandon, his barks punctuating the twilight like exclamation points. The air smells like pine sap and grilled burgers from the neighbor's cookout. A symphony of possibility that drowns out old echoes. I don't check Lila's social media anymore. Don't doom scroll through curated glimpses of her healing journey terror. Let slip she's still in town. Dating that guy openly now. Posting photos of artisanal coffees and sunset hikes with captions dripping in faux profundity. I don't hate her for it. The fire of anger has banked to ash. I don't miss her. Not the version she became. I just exist, unapologetic and whole. And it's more than enough, it's everything. Last week, I met someone at the bookstore, a regular with a stack of sci-fi paperbacks and a laugh that crinkles her eyes like crepe paper. We talked for an hour about dystopian worlds and the stars we could almost touch from Denver's light-polluted skies. No grand gestures, no tests or taunts, just easy conversation that flowed like the river snaking through the city. It's early, fragile as spring ice, but it feels right, not a harbor, but a horizon. If you've ever walked away from a betrayal that carved you hollow and found yourself on the other side, pieced back together stronger, share your story below. The moments that break us can also rebuild us into something unbreakable. And I want to hear yours, the raw edges, the quiet triumphs. Subscribe to End Stories for more raw confessions straight from the heart, where every ending is a doorway to a bolder beginning. Hit that bell, join the conversation, and remember, your story, no matter how shattered, is still worth telling.